when I started playing, there were actual stages to play upon, you
Right.
know, and then, I mean, this is years going by. I mean, I was hardcore, like I will never stop playing, and, the big fish in a little pond in my little nook over here,
Yeah.
and to this day, when I started shooting weddings in the early years of shooting weddings, it would just be the funniest thing. I'd be at the waiting for the bride to come down the aisle in the church. I'll never forget, this happened one time. And, you know, this is the big moment's about to happen. We're supposed to be quiet. We're in the church, and I see this guy get up from the pew, points over at me, yells my name, and starts playing air guitar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Pulling the curtain back, we are recording Thanksgiving week. Who knows when this episode will go out, but my buddy Steve spent the day hanging out with his significant other, and now then she's watching TV, and he's going to talk Bruce with me. Life is good. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey there. Thank you for having me on, Jesse.
Yeah, so tell us a little about yourself.
Oh, geez. Well, I live in the Midwest. I live in a place called Crown Point, Indiana. But I'm very close to Chicago. So that's where I was today. Spent the day in Chicago. I'm out there quite a bit. Um, I have many jobs over the years, but the last 14 years and 10 of those as full time. I'm a wedding photographer, which is something I never would have dreamed of. Kind of got into it later on in my life here. And like people start off in their 20s, I started off in my 30s doing it. So uh,
How did you fall into being a professional wedding photographer?
oh, well, it's quite the story. Well, I was a musician, and I did that in high school. I was gigging while I was in high school,
Mhm.
4 nights a week actually. And then I would very groggily show up for class, and graduated high school, and I was like, any kid, I was like, this is unbelievable. They're paying me, in local clubs to play
Yeah.
guitar. And then, I had a day job, which was whatever I could get. I ended up working at it wasn't a factory really, but it was a Monday through Thursday type of job. And of course, when you're young, I could do Wednesday night gigs and show up at 6 o'clock in the morning and drive a forklift, and that's
Right.
kind of was my thing. And then I had the weekends off to play music, and I did that for years upon years. And then all of a sudden, you're like, huh, I'm like 30 years old, and Chris and I, who lives here, we were together then, but I didn't, we weren't married and we didn't have kids, but I said to my friends, well, where are you? Why aren't you out at the gig? And they said, well, we have families, we have children now that we have to tend to, and I was one of those people that I didn't quite understand that.
Yes.
And then, when you play, around locally, and then, I did some Midwest shows, they want you to have an audience,
Right.
bring an audience. And then when I wasn't seeing that anymore, I just realized I wanted to do something else that was creative, but yet, maybe for as I advanced and got older, that, would be a job, an
Right.
actual job. Not that being a musician isn't, it most certainly is, but it's difficult to do when you get to
Hmm.
that point. And so yeah, so I kind of found this and fell in love with it. Yeah, another love of my life besides playing music, and yeah, it took a good, and I put music aside because I knew I couldn't do both. I would always be drawn to that. And yeah, I became a photographer, and I got to the point where I couldn't work a day job anymore because I had so much work at it. And I became my own business, my own boss. So that's how I was able to take Monday off today and go into the city with her, and the season's winding down here in the
Right.
Midwest. It's cold now, I do winter weddings, of course, but I'm done for the year. I did 34 weddings that I shot this year. For someone who's 50, it's quite the
That's a lot.
task,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah, so
So my day gig is I
yeah.
run a contact center for a roadside assistance company. We specialize in RVs, and
Wow.
there's two seasons. There's summer and getting ready for summer. I'm guessing to a certain degree you have that same thing. You have wedding season, which is, the summer, and then getting ready for wedding season.
Yeah, yes. I'm heading into I learned a lot of things that I just can't have a website and pretty pictures and people
Yeah,
aren't going to come find you. I
right.
mean, they'll find you a little bit, but if you want to make a living at it, you need to market yourself, which is
Yes.
sometimes a dirty word, especially when you're a musician. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Who would do such a corporate thing, and but that's what you have to do. So you have to put the word out. So that's what I'm into now.
Yeah.
A little break here, people are busy with the holidays, but yeah, now I got to get the word out. I got to work on my website, see what's working, see what's not. I do that in the off season. And yeah, have lots of meetings. Of course, I have a lot booked for next year already, but I have to kick that into gear and get the rest of my bookings in, and it's
Yeah. Do you
it's quite the hustle.
do you just do weddings?
I do other types of photography, but that is mainly what I
Okay.
do. If I didn't have the weddings, I wouldn't make a living,
Okay.
you know.
I didn't know, like, I don't know if they still do high school graduation photos, and you go for your senior pictures and such. That's how old I
Sure.
am. I remember all having to do that.
I've done those. I've done those at the beginning when I started. It was more so. Now with the prevalence of cell phones and things like that, a lot of parents opt to, maybe this better than me. I don't know how old your kids are or
Yeah.
what they were, but if you say, hey, to a 15-year-old, well, it would be 17-year-old for senior
Yeah.
photos, hey, I'm going to take you to a professional photographer. They're probably going to be like, I don't want to do that, especially a
Yeah.
guy,
Sure.
a boy. And so, now, they can say, hey, we're going to take you to the dance. And I see it here a lot, where
Yeah.
I see at local parks, parents just come out en masse during that time, and they're
Yes.
taking their own pictures a lot. I mean, it still does happen, and I still do a few of them, but that's
Yeah.
not my main job. I mean,
Yeah. Because and I promise we're gonna get to music, listeners.
that's all right.
But right, it's one thing to have photos that with your digital camera or even with your phone, but for a wedding, you want something that's quote unquote professional. You want
Yeah.
to, because this is an important event and you want to capture that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more fast paced than it's ever been.
Yeah.
So even then when I first started, but to segue it into music,
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind having Danny Clinch's job. I can
Yeah,
tell you that.
yeah,
We all know who he
exactly.
is.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't mind being Jim Rotola.
There
I
you
would
go.
be very happy doing that. All right, we always like to start at the beginning, Steve. So, growing up, what kind of music did your family listen to when you were a young one?
Yeah, my mom was close to 50 years old when she had me,
Mm,
right? So there wasn't a lot of music in the house, there was a lot of sports, from my dad. And I got into music on my own by accident, actually. And then Bruce came a little bit later. I went on, I don't know how old I was, a very young boy, was not playing guitar. Music was not on my radar. I somehow was able to whisk away with one of my buddy's parents on like a vacation of some sort in Michigan. And we walked into some general store, and there was this gigantic poster of Elvis, right, in 1977. And it was his new album, which was Moody Blue, and it was this vinyl, and it had blue, and I didn't know anything about music, but I just thought that looks cool, and it's a blue album. I really need to buy that. But then I needed money for the trip,
yeah.
the little money that my parents gave me, so I didn't buy it, but I had a plan in my head that I'd buy it when I went home. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And as we drove back to whatever cottage they were staying at, I heard over the radio that Elvis had died,
Hmm.
you know. So it was that day. It was,
Wow.
and I was fascinated by that. I just saw this. And then when I got back home, I was like, I begged my parents, you gotta buy this for me, and we went everywhere, and it was all sold out. You couldn't get
Sure.
it. So it was like later that year, I finally got a hold of it. And then I became fascinated with rock music, and I started looking into it. And then a few years, and then I finally said, hey, you got to get me a guitar, and stuff like that. And I took lessons. And then I got into the Columbia House Music Club thing, and I didn't know anything about music. And I got a bunch of stuff, whatever they got you for a penny, or whatever.
Sure. We all
And
did
then I
that.
would
If you're a
slowly get
certain age, you did that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I slowly got sucked into it and started looking through this little magazine that they gave you. And I saw Darkness on the Edge of Town, and this was right before The River was going to come out,
Okay.
so this was 1980. And but it hadn't come out yet, and I really wasn't in tune to music. I really wouldn't know what was coming out anywhere. All I knew was music came in the mail from this place. I didn't
Right.
even really know about music stores or anything, record stores or and so yeah, I found Darkness on the Edge of Town. And my parents were of a different generation, and I was a teenager, and we were button heads at that time. And there was something about the angst of that record that I just tied into, you know. Um, and then The River came out. Somehow that landed on my radar. So it was like, boom, I had these two albums right there. And then I went back, found Born to Run, found the other ones. And then yeah, went to my first Springsteen concert. I wasn't old enough to drive. And in 81, my
You,
dad took
yeah,
me to
you mentioned that there was that he dropped you off. Tell me that story.
yeah. It's something I always remember. Obviously, my first Springsteen show, but also, my dad. I had been to a couple of shows. We had a theater close to us in town here, and they had a lot of like Wayne Newton kind of stuff that I
Hmm.
didn't go to. But every once in a while, they'd have a rock show, and I went to those, a couple of them. So Bruce wasn't my first show, but I had an idea that concerts, the main act played for like 45 minutes to an hour. That was in my mind. And I certainly wasn't going to tell my dad any different. And so he drove me down to Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, which is this horrible building. It's named something else now. And Bruce even mentioned it once, I think on Conan O'Brien on some late night show years later in the mid 2000s. And I was like, he's he said it was the crappiest sounding venue that he'd ever been to, and it was known. And he talked about the airplanes flying over it close to O'Hare, and all that was true. And that was the show, that I went to. My dad dropped me off. He parked somewhere, figured it would be over in an hour. and it obviously wasn't. And it went on, and there were no cell phones at the time, so you couldn't contact me. And I just remember Devil with the Blue Dress was playing. It was the encores, and all the lights came up, and you get to look around the arena. And my dad did not have a ticket. It was only me. I went by myself, and I looked up and I saw him walk out onto the upper mezzanine, his hands on his hips, just sort of looking like, what is this? What is taking so long? What is going on here? And the security guard, it turns out, had told him, yeah, this is going to end soon. You could just go in now, let him in. So he got a little taste of it. I found him somehow outside, and we drove back hours later. I don't even remember if it was a weekend or a weekday. I think it might have been a weekday. He probably had to work the next day. I'm sure he was none too happy with me that he was out that late. And yeah, I'll always remember that. My dad's passed away. Both my parents passed away now, but that's kind of where it started right there. And then of course I couldn't believe it. And concerts after that, Bruce, ruined, right?
Yes,
because
I
you get to
understand.
see other acts and you're like, oh, okay.
So Steve, did it come up before you lost your dad? Would that memory come up every once in a while when you guys are, sitting around talking? The reason I ask is
Mhm.
my son was in junior high, and we went
Yeah.
to a WrestleMania that was in Houston. It was WrestleMania 17, and he routinely, he's now 32, still brings up that weekend of him and I going down
Uh,
and watching WrestleMania. So I didn't know if your dad would bring up like, yeah, remember the time I dropped you off and you like took forever?
yeah, I don't recall if it was talked about really that much. After that, I was so into music myself
Yeah.
that I think they were stunned. My dad was like the guy who was like, they were like, well, I don't know about this music thing that you're doing, because they knew I was in school, and like, I don't know how they knew I was doing this, but back then, a friend of mine, we wanted to play music so badly that we would answer ads, but we were kids,
Yeah.
and a band took us in, and they were, gasp, 30 years old, right? And we were like, oh, old people,
Hmm.
at the time you're
Yeah.
thinking that. And you know they liked us though, and
Yeah.
you're like, you guys play bass, we need a bass and a guitarist. And I was like, we were like, yeah, we do that. And we went to a pawn shop, we got a bass. We played it like a guitar, which was, we
Yeah.
played it with a pick, which probably wasn't the what they were looking for, but nonetheless they took us in and got us the IDs to get us into the
Hmm.
clubs. We didn't abuse the situation. We never really we didn't delve into anything illegal. We didn't drink. We didn't do anything. We were just there for the
For the
music.
music.
And my dad said, "What's going on with this music thing?" And I said, "Oh, I got paid $100 tonight," And he's like, "Oh, you did?" He's like, "Okay, keep doing it." So
Yeah.
he would come to the shows, and now we're talking. I'm in my last year of school. We're talking like Born USA's coming out now.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, oh, this cult artist that we never heard of before that our son is into for some
Yeah.
reason. Now he's on People's Mag.
Everyone in the world has heard him. So a
Right.
couple questions. One, you, without knowing you, maybe you know this now, but you followed the teller rule of Penn and Teller.
I did.
Yes, they talk about he always tells people say yes. When they ask you, can you do this trick? Yes. And
Right.
then once you get the contract, then you can figure out how to do it. But
Yeah.
just say yes. So you're
Right.
doing that. The other story that I want to share, there is a guy named Mike Reiner who is here in Dallas. He is a Hall of Fame radio um announcer. He did news for the local rock station. He started sports talk here in Dallas. But he's always played in bands, always. And in fact, he has holes of pop culture because he didn't watch TV in high school. He was out playing gigs.
Right.
So he talked about, and there's two stories, the one that everyone says, and then there's the true story. The true story is that Stevie Ray Vaughan auditioned to be in his band and they turned him down. And they always make fun of him. Oh yeah, you guys were too good
Mhm.
for Stevie Ray Vaughan. The
Right.
reality was, he'll tell the story, we were blown away by him. We knew he was better than anyone else we would get, but he was 16 at the time. And
Ah,
we knew that that just would be a nightmare because we played bars. And
yeah.
so the reason they didn't have him join the band is because he was underage and it would have caused all problems. But the fellow sports talk hosts go, "Oh, you thought you were too good for Stevie Ray."
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Right. And I imagine there is that, um you I my brother-in-law was just on the podcast and he grew up in the 60s and he did the same thing. He was in a garage band by the time he was in high school, and all the way through college they would play the circuit. They would play the Louisiana circuit. There was like, this 4 or 5 towns all over South Louisiana, and you just would go around playing the
Yeah.
circuit. So, um did you mentioned a little bit, you kept playing until you reached the point where it I'm all my fans are now at home with the kids.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could I mean, I could yeah, it's funny because when I started playing, there were actual stages to play upon, you
Right.
know. And then I mean, this is years going by. I mean, I was hardcore. Like I will never stop playing, and a big fish in a little pond in my little nook over here.
Yeah.
And to this day, when I started shooting weddings in the early years of shooting weddings, it would just be the funniest thing. I'd be at the waiting for the bride to come down the aisle in the church. I'll never forget, this happened one time. And you know, this is the big moment's about to happen. We're supposed to be quiet. We're in the church, and I see this guy get up from the pew, points over at me, yells my name, and starts playing air guitar. You know, and you're like, oh no, oh no. And my business is called Region Weddings because they call this area the region. And a lot of people who start photography business have their name and they put photography at the end of it. But the reason why I didn't was because at that time, when I started, I shot my first wedding in 2008, August of 2008, and I definitely wasn't ready to do it. But even that was related to music. But uh, you know, what you call, if you went onto Google at the time,
Hmm.
you typed my name in, it would be all music.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, I can't have that because if I were hiring somebody for this big event, I would never hire a musician because they're not not going to be there on time. All the cliches about musicians, they're not really cliches. They're actually true.
Yeah.
Even though that wasn't me. Me and my buddy, the guy I started off with, it, we were the ones who were always, pushing everyone for the gig. We were the ones that booked the gig. We were the ones that set up the PA. I was writing music as well. We were hardcore about it. And the funny thing about the first wedding is, I was doing portraits and kind of learning and finding my way into doing what I do now for a job. And somebody took some family portraits and hung it in their shop. They worked on cars, and this guy came in and he saw all the photos and said, "Hey, tell me who did this." And so that's how the guy got my number, called me up, and said, I want you to shoot my daughter's wedding next year in August of 2008. I get the call in 2007. And I'm like, sorry, no. You said I should just say yes, but I said no, because it's a big thing. I wasn't quite ready for it. He's trying to talk me into it. And then he asked my name, and I told him, and he said, I thought you sounded familiar. I hired you in my band when you were 19 years old. And it was like my second band. And he's like, oh yeah, you came to all the practices. You were there on time. He's like, that's who I want to shoot my daughter's wedding. He's like, I won't take no for an answer. So he hired me. I shot my first wedding. So I owe that gentleman, who passed away, by the way, just last year.
Mm,
And and so I got to see his daughter again because I had photographed their wedding years ago. And I got the job done. It wasn't my best work. It was my first one. And
yeah.
but anyway, it's just funny how things interconnect like that.
Yeah.
And to bring it back to Bruce, that band that I was in, that I got hired in, we did a lot of Bruce covers at the time, and especially that first band, because like I said, he was extremely popular, and that was when you would hear those songs in local bars. I mean, any bar band could do "I'm Going Down," you know,
Right.
uh, and heck, I think I even covered "Born in the USA" once. I couldn't scream it out like Bruce could, obviously,
Yeah.
but we did that, and yeah.
So you've kind of talked about discovering Bruce, but can you articulate why his music spoke to you so much?
Yeah, at that time, like I said, I was in, I of course later on, my parents didn't pass away for quite a few years. They lived to be a great age, both of them. My mom lived a little bit longer, but we met again. I guess you should say, after I moved out and I started to do my thing. We reconnected. They got older. I helped take care of them, and we were able to work out the differences that we were having, when I was 15, 14, years old, and wanting to go out and do my thing. And my parents were in the retiring mode, because like I
Right.
said, my mom was close to 50 when she had me. So there was a big disconnect there. And Darkness on the Edge of Town, Adam Raise a Cane, I just remember playing that up in my parents' house, in the top floors where I stayed. I put on my headphones, and I was raging about things, a lot of things.
Sure.
I went to a high school that was rough.
Hmm.
I didn't live in a great area. And yeah, we I had all that going on, and so I related to that album. And then I think there was the Elvis thing too, because
Sure.
Bruce has a lot of that in the performance, and I just
Right.
loved great performers.
Right.
You and I know we're jumping way ahead here,
No,
but
but that's
I
okay.
got I got into the soul music then too. You
Right.
know, um, that Columbia Record House, as cheesy as it was, and they repackaged it, and however they were getting over on it somehow, some way, but it kind of didn't matter because there were so many genres in that little catalog, and you just pick stuff, you know. And so yeah, I would pick soul music, I'd pick Credence music, the classic rock stuff, Beatles, Billy Joel, Bruce, of course, and yeah, I just devoured it all, but I really loved great performances,
Hmm.
and so yeah, and that was sort of my connection there, the concert experience. And yeah, the river was like the live show on record,
Yeah.
and I remember playing the river and delving into certain cuts deeply. Like the river song itself, I knew was great. I knew these were great lyrics, but I was too young to really understand what was going on in that song. But boom, out in the street, I could go right to that. And then, it was like a live show, in your headphones, the river was.
Yeah.
Um, and then lyrically, I dived into that. And then Born to Run, I just appreciated because as I was learning music, I was like, wow, this is really well written music, Born to Run. I mean, it was incredibly well written music, musically, just
Right.
the chord changes and that, there's a lot of complex stuff happening in Born to Run. Um, and so, I really appreciated it for that, and I was pretty young, and Bruce was young when he wrote that album, and it had that let's get out of town, because I lived, in Gary, Indiana, and
Sure.
I wanted to get out. It
Yeah.
was close to Chicago. I wanted to go into the city, like
Right.
Bruce wanted to get to New York. So I could relate to it like that.
Absolutely. Did so I always preface this, the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how
Uh,
big of a fan you are, but have you counted how many times you've seen him?
you know, I was just listening to one of your shows before this, and I'd have
Yeah.
to look it up on my podcast app here. I forgot his name. Um, Maybe he's from the East Coast up in Connecticut or
Yeah.
whatever. And I said, "Oh man, he's going to ask me that." I don't know, but
Okay.
I would guess in the 35 to 40 range, maybe a
Okay.
little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, um, well, I could tell you one of the big shows that I missed was the Born USA Stadium leg.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of shows on the arena portion, um, and I had a gig when they did Soldier Field in
Okay.
Chicago, and I was too committed to my gig.
No, that's the right
I
choice.
could have went,
Yeah. I mean,
and
Bruce would have told you, no, don't go. Do the gig. Right?
exactly. But
Yes.
I remember that night very well. It was one of those nights. It was in that very first band that
Yeah.
and I was still in school, and yeah, no one was there that night. Put it that way. It
Yeah.
was an empty room we played to, and I was quite dejected on our little set list breaks. And I remember
Yeah.
the band consoling me
Yeah.
and but giving me a pep talk and how proud they were that I was doing the gig, as
That's
opposed to
funny. That's great.
I
No,
do.
we all should have canceled and gone to Bruce.
Yeah,
That's great.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned that. What are your thoughts on the cover album? He's got a new release now that we've been living with it for about a week or so. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, we were, I've listened to it off and on since it got
Yeah.
released. And it's funny because I told Chris, my girlfriend, we were coming back from the city today, and I said, I got to pop on Only the Strong Survive. I have homework to do, and
Yeah.
and she's like, "What is this thing on your calendar that you're doing tonight?" And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
we're talking about Bruce today, and so yeah, I love this type of music, you know. I'm also one of those people that I have a little bit of rock critic in my
Sure.
brain as well.
Yeah.
And I don't like to be influenced by reviews, but I did happen to catch the Atlantic review
Okay.
of the album, which I don't know if you've read that yet. Um, I think I'll just go over it and say his voice. He wasn't kidding when he said I concentrated on my voice. I think it sounds great, but in typical Bruce fashion, it sounds even better live. Uh, I don't know if you caught the Fallon
I
performances that have
did.
been so far, but
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, it sounds great live. And there's something about that energy,
Yeah.
even though it's in a studio, essentially,
Right.
there are people there or whatever. Um, but yeah, so I love the music on here. I was familiar with most of it. I'm bringing it up now here on my phone, taking a look.
Mhm.
Only the Star Survive itself. I mentioned Elvis before. I was most familiar with the Elvis cover version, which I think is an album called from from Elvis in Memphis, I
Okay.
believe. It's got Wearing That Love Down Look, Power of My Love. It was recorded in Memphis studio with I'm going to say the musicians wrong, but very highly regarded musicians at that time. And I it, I don't think Bruce's version can beat that, you
Hmm.
know, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a great choice, great song. My favorite from the album is Turn Back the Hands of Time.
Hmm.
Uh, I didn't know it was a hit in 1970. It's a hit for me today. I vaguely recall. I said this song sounds familiar to me. I know I had heard it. Um, I do question a little bit. From an artistic standpoint, its existence. You know, but at the same time, I think it's all right to, you know, I really think I remember Bruce saying at the time, at one point, before we knew about this album, I'm going to throw the biggest party ever type
Right.
of thing. I don't know. I just get the impression this may have been a part of that, recorded during COVID, him and Aniello hunkered
Yeah.
down, and just, it's tough to say, well, I've got this downtime. I'm just going to write songs. I mean, he's
Yeah.
got tons of stuff in the can, we know, but
Right.
yeah.
And he's talked about it a couple times in the interview,
Mhm.
and I tend to be I tend to not be the conspiracy guy that, I tend to
Yeah.
believe what someone says. And
Yeah.
he says, right now, I'm not, my words, not his, my muse is not speaking to me. I'm
Right.
not writing for the band right now. I wanted to record. The cynical person said, oh, because he's got a record contract. I just like to believe he wanted to record this and he thought it would be
Yeah.
fun. And I define that as fun. I know someone else, a couple of people had said, like, why? What's the purpose of this? What is the reason? And I don't know if there is another reason. I think
Right.
it's just he felt like recording it, and I've enjoyed it. I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think it's a I'm as we're recording this, we've talked about it's Thanksgiving week, and Friday morning I've got to head down to visit my
Hmm.
mom, and I will probably have this, one of the albums I'll be playing in the car. It's about a 6-hour drive, is
Yeah.
this album, because it's a fun album to listen to.
Yeah. It's a great in your car type of
Yes.
record.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and yeah, I mean, I like it,
Yeah.
when I talk with people about music, we tend to go, my music aficionado friends
Yeah.
go overboard in dissecting things, and I would totally do that with, a new original Bruce Springsteen release, or
Right.
if he releases these 5 unreleased albums that he spoke about
Yeah.
recently, that, but he always says coming soon. He's on a totally different
Yeah. He is on a different time frame.
wavelengths. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do. I do think that, um, you know, I I was a casual fan, so I don't remember the excitement of tracks, but I can only
No.
imagine that when if we truly do get 5 albums, in a box set, one, people are going to complain a lot about the cost because that is the nature of the business nowadays.
Yeah.
But it's going to be cool to get 5 albums at one time and just to hear the different things. Yeah. Do you have tickets for the next show, for the next tour?
Yeah. Not only, yeah, I have the opening night in Tampa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. We can touch on the ticket stuff too.
Please. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Um, eh, you know, um, I had not bought tickets for any. Well, I'll just tell you first. I'm in Tampa.
Yeah.
I have tickets. I'm happy with my tickets. I paid a good price.
Okay.
At good price, as in, I didn't pay, platinum, or I didn't
Yeah.
pay the elevated price.
Okay.
Um, the name escapes me at the moment, but
Yeah, with dynamic pricing and yeah,
dynamic. There you go.
you got a ticket that you were comfortable paying for the
Yes,
amount.
and
Okay.
and close to whatever face value is,
Okay.
and then but the thing about this ticket go around, people have called it a fiasco. I agree, but I'm not like hanging my fandom of all these years out to dry because of it. And I have my own theories on how all this came about and stuff like that. But these um I hadn't bought big tickets until the last River tour, the 2016
Yeah.
2017 run, where we didn't have those. So I hadn't bought any big shows. But going in the buildup of this, I was aware that dynamic pricing existed. And I didn't buy any Pearl Jam tickets, but I went in to see what that was all about. So I had an inkling of what I was going into. And I also knew that it was the type of thing that I wasn't as crazed as I usually was when the tickets would come on sale, thinking I got to get these things right now. I
Yeah.
was like, well, if it doesn't happen, I'm going to wait it out and I'm going to get a ticket and it's going to be a good price and it's going to be a good ticket because the system doesn't work like it did before. So I kind of knew that going in. But the bad thing about this thing, the verified fan deal,
Yeah.
is that it precluded you from getting another show that was on that initial run.
Right.
And so I ended up getting Cleveland for I think March or I think April. I gotta look at the calendar because that wasn't involved in this the next week. Like I couldn't go in and look for these. I mean, I can now, I believe,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. I wasn't part of the initial on sale. I wasn't allowed to
Right.
because my code was just for that one for Tampa.
Yeah.
So that needs to get fixed. I think.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree that, I've been accused of being kind of the overly optimistic fan, and I will raise my hand and guilty. Um, I do think that there was a lot of things wrong. I The thing that irritates me the most about Ticketmaster is if I am leaving a crowded sports arena and I try to get an Uber, it tells
mm,
me surge pricing is in effect and you are paying 5 times the rate. I wish
mhm,
that Ticketmaster would do that. I wish they would be honest. This is dynamic pricing and the face value is $100. If right now you're paying 4 times the face value, I wish they
right,
would be that transparent. Because at this time
absolutely,
you aren't sure. I know it's not face value, but what is the face value? Um, I do. I I understand being upset that you didn't get tickets. I understand that tickets cost too much. I understand all these things. What I don't understand is you put taking all this years of fandom and throwing it away
right,
because um quote unquote Bruce has forgotten the common man or whatever. And so my thing is he's been there for me and his music has been to me. So I appreciate it. And I stand by my statement that the only way everyone would have been happy is if everyone had gotten the tickets they want at the shows
yeah,
they want in the section they want at the price they wanted to pay.
right,
That was it. And that's just not going to happen. I read somewhere that Taylor Swift, if she would have to tour like 20 years,
right,
stadiums for everyone who wants to get a ticket to get it. And I
yeah,
think the demand for this E Street tour is incredibly high because
yeah,
the amount of time in front of us is shorter than the time behind us. So yeah,
right,
yeah,
yeah,
very good.
yeah.
Um, you said do you have a theory or do you want to speculate why you think he's doing the covers now? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but
Oh, yeah. Well, my theory was more about the ticket on sales and everything like that.
Yeah,
I'm not an apologist for Bruce, and he did the Rolling Stone article
yeah,
as we're recording this, that
yeah,
recently came out, and that created more of a furor, you
yes.
know.
As I
But
said, for all those people who said they were mad that he wasn't commenting, you can't be mad at
right,
him about that. But now that you can be mad about what he said, perhaps, but you can't be mad anymore that he hasn't addressed it. You
yeah.
know?
I mean, this is somebody who signed a contract on the hood of a car with
Yeah,
Mike Appel years upon years ago, right?
yeah,
This is somebody who was in the recording studio spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, all these outtakes, all those tracks, outtakes, these 5 albums and stuff like that, or at least back then. I mean, now he's
yeah,
got the home studio, so it's not as
yeah,
costly, but this is a guy that after the River tour, recently he said he had $20,000 in the bank.
yes,
After the River tour, you
right.
know. So this is somebody who doesn't get into the weeds of things, and as he's gotten older, he reminds me a lot of the older gentlemen who they can't be bothered with the details,
Yeah,
and I think he's somebody who's like, well, geez, the band's, as he said in the Rolling Stone article, which I think came out very flippant, but I don't think it was as
yeah,
flippant as people think. He was pretty much saying, they're 73 years old, like we we got to have incentive for them to go out there. He probably
yeah,
knew he was doing it's a big band anyway, a bigger band.
yeah,
We want to take care of the crew who has
yeah,
not worked. I
yeah,
mean, I know they go from different
sure.
acts and stuff
Yeah,
like that, but so is there something we could, where I'm trying to imitate him now, but like,
yeah,
can we work it out to that, but we take care of the fans too, and then someone says, hey, we got this thing called verified fan.
hmm,
So the fan has to be they verified that they're a fan. I mean, it sounds good, right?
yeah,
Verified fan. I could see a guy like Bruce going, well, yeah, I like that, you
yeah,
know,
exactly.
and then Landau or whoever, not putting it all on Mr.
Yeah,
Landau, but they're there to make this happen when the
yeah,
artist gives this vague thing to them,
yeah,
and like you said, you tend to believe it's usually what people tell you is exactly
yeah,
what they're doing or the truth. And he said, well, I just went to my guys and said, do this. That's what he said in the Rolling Stone. And
yeah,
that's how I pictured it the whole time. And I could see him saying, well, let's take care of the fans. I understand,
yeah,
things, costs rise, and we're going to be, take care of the fans, take care of the band, take care of the crew,
yeah,
verified fan, all this stuff, and him signing off on it,
right.
you know, not really, and maybe still not understanding. I don't see him on Ticketmaster.com with an account seeing the
Yeah,
blues and the reds and
and going,
maybe
holy
it's been
crap.
explained afterwards,
Yeah.
right? Um,
And
so
the
there's that
story
aspect
is,
of it.
right? I mean, whether you believe it or not, Ticketmaster is saying the average price was this, and
Yes.
and I realize there's lies and statistics, right? That
Right. Sure.
you can manipulate anything you want. Um, but I saw someone note, well, maybe the band shouldn't stay in $700 a night hotels. Like, okay,
Yeah.
they're not going to the Holiday Inn
Right.
Express, but
Right.
not that I love Holiday Inn Express, but
Sure.
it's a big crew. It's a lot of crew,
Yeah.
and the reality is a lot of people are going to make a lot of money. And I do think he was joking and kind of halfway sarcastic when he said, and tell you what, if anyone's disappointed afterwards, we'll refund the money. They're not going to refund the money because there's
No, no.
there's no mechanism for that.
What
Uh,
I read from that
yeah,
was when people say, uh, mock what he said recently, that the band is going to be at their peak on the next
yeah,
tour, right? And they're going, oh, he's not going to be able to better the 78 tour, and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, I want my musicians to be badasses, right?
Yes.
I want them saying, we're going to tear it up. We are going to be at our peak. You have not seen it. I mean, that's what I want. I want them psyched up out there, and that's what that is.
Yes.
That's, people don't understand that when you're up there doing, performance,
Yeah.
whether it be a small bar like I've done, or other, festivals I've done like that, you got to psych yourself up to go out there and play,
Yeah.
and to land, and that's what that is, and that's exactly what I would want him to say,
Yeah.
and yeah, but uh, you know, fans, it's a passionate thing, so
It
they get
is. They are
passionate
very
about it.
passionate, and there is a
Yeah.
reason why it's fan fanatics, right? We
Right.
are.
Yeah.
Um, any thoughts on what do you want to see him perform? Any thoughts on mix of the tour? What
Sure.
you'd love to see?
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, I'm his perfect fan, where I'm like, I want to see where he takes me, and
Yeah.
I do.
Yes.
But, you know, let me be part of the management team. Let
Yeah.
me be part of one of the guys where he says, what should I do here?
Yeah.
It's like, Bruce, I got albums for him to do. I
Yeah.
got producers for him to work with. I got all
Yeah.
that in my head, right?
Right.
But yeah, I would, when Letter to You came out, I envisioned a 2020, remember 2020?
Yes.
I envisioned a 2020 tour. Sorry about these notifications here. If
That's
it's
okay. You're good.
blinging, I should have shut that off.
Now you're good.
Um, and and I envisioned Ghost opening it.
Yeah.
I would not be upset if that occurred. Um, I dug the Letter to You album. I want to hear new music from Bruce.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of what he's saying. I love Western Stars. I think it's a masterpiece of a record. But just like him, I'm not necessarily wanting to hear that. And he seems to be talking about doing a couple of songs from the Souls cover, and I think he
Yeah.
should, because I think it lends itself well to the stage, especially the
Yes.
encores. Some of those,
Yeah, and it sounds like they're going to do the E Street Orchestra, right? Where
yeah,
we're going to have a horn
yeah.
section. We're going to have, I think, maybe a string, at least more than just Susie on violin, maybe two or three violins, a backup, musicians. I think it would be great.
Mhm.
Terry Smith and I talked about it in our review that
Yeah.
we know this won't happen, but picture doing Western Stars, Letter to You, Only the
Mm.
Strong, and only like 5 or 6 slots for your
Right.
traditional E Street songs, right? And
Yeah, I heard that. I
yeah,
heard
and
that show.
talk about being, I know the fandom would be disappointed, right? Like, what? We're not going to get Badlands, but think of how many
Yeah.
unique, chances you'd get. Um,
Yeah.
I think he said they may do one Western Stars. I said, I think in a recent interview he read.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that um, I would have fun with any of these soul covers as your encores, like 2 or 3 of those,
Mhm.
and just break it out. We're going to enjoy whatever he gives us. And I agree with you. I kind of trust him to find the lead, but I am hoping a little bit heavy on Letter to You.
Yeah,
I'm
I would like
hoping,
that.
yeah, Burning Train, Ghost.
Sure.
I do think if I was producing it, I would have I'll See You in My Dreams as his final song, for each
Yeah.
show. I think that's a good way, but it'll be fun.
Yep.
Um,
I heard you mention that too.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. He used to kind of do that sort of with My Beautiful Reward, what you're
yes,
describing, you
yeah,
know.
and that would be nice. Oh.
Mhm.
All right. So is there anything I should have asked you, Steve, that I haven't?
Oh, geez. Uh, well, you didn't ask me. I was surprised you didn't ask me about my last name. being so close to little Steven's last name in pronunciation.
All right. So tell me, is there a story behind that?
There's a small story.
All right.
It will go back again.
Okay.
But I got the river
All right.
back in school days, and I
Yeah.
got the river. And actually, it was before that,
Okay.
because you'd read the random notes in Rolling Stone, and I remember reading, and this is just a stupid story, but my last
No, it's a I love
Vansak,
start. Yeah,
which
Vansak.
is
Yeah.
and my
Yeah,
name is
Steve Van
Steve.
Zach. Yeah, it's like if you
Right.
say it really quick, you could
If
go,
you say it
"Hey."
quick, if you say it quick, and
Yeah.
it would, my dad's name was also that.
Okay.
So caller ID existed then, I believe. And the theory was, I read in Rolling Stone that Bruce and the band were recording at the power station in New York City. And me and
Yeah.
my buddy, who had just become fans, Darkness on the Edge of Town, we're like, well, why don't we call there as you,
Yeah.
Steve Van Sant, right? And ask if you could talk to Bruce.
Yeah.
Like idiots, like idiot kids, right? So we did that. We called the power station in New York City and got through to somebody there.
Yeah.
And said, "This is Steve," and they said, "Yeah," and they were like, we were like, "Is Bruce there? I'd like to talk to him." Just like that. And they said, "No, he's not here." And then we said, "Okay," and that was that. So that was our attempt at using my last name for something that was so close to a band member, and we did not succeed.
See, I should have said, "Hi, this is Jesse Jackson. I need to talk to Barack Obama." Like, "Oh yeah, Reverend Jackson, let me get you through right away."
Yeah, see, I did not comment on your name.
Yes.
See, I figured this guy hears that all the time. So
yes.
I'm not going to do that. Jesse Jackson, also from my area here in the Chicago area. So
I never mind people commenting it. The only time that bothers me is when they laugh really loud and like, "Oh, you've never heard this joke before." I'm like, "Really?"
Right.
Right? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna stay far away from that,
Yeah.
But you could have put, my name as the guest on the show.
Yes.
And you'll probably get more plays because people are going to very quickly go, "Oh,
yeah,
we got little Steven on the show," and
Yeah,
then they could be incredibly disappointed with me. So
I love that. So do you still play every once in a while? Do you just for fun, or do you every once in a while your buddies and you get together and play a little bit?
Next month there's going to be a thing. Some former band members of my very last band, because I continued to play even though I started this little career.
Yeah.
I continued to play shows and a few festivals here and there. But then, I knew that if it was going to be a career, I'd be every Saturday, doing what I do now.
Yeah.
And I would not be able to play. So, that had to go right there. But yeah, I still love it. And I can still do it, so.
That's nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. All right. Let's get to the Mary question. So if you are a friend of Steve, or you're listening to this because we have Steve Van Zandt on the show, I end every episode with a Mary question. Jay Armstrong, a recently retired honors English teacher from the Philadelphia area, when he was teaching, he would spend 2 days with this class breaking apart Thunder Road. They would talk about the themes, they talk about the lyrics, they talk about the imagery that Bruce is painting. And then at the end of the 2 days, he would ask the question, does Mary get in the car? So Steve, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Oh, absolutely. Bruce isn't going to let a beautiful woman not get into the car. Absolutely. It's a yes all the way. It's an optimistic song.
Very nice. I love that. Cool. All right. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
Well, if they want to check out my work, Region Weddings, that's my website, that's my Instagram. check out some nice wedding photos and hire me for their for their wedding or their daughter's wedding.
Yes.
That's
Yes,
right.
absolutely. Yeah. And you're on Twitter at Steve Vansak.
Yeah,
And
I'm
so,
more of a lurker, but
yeah,
yeah, that's where I found you
yeah,
in some thread on Bruce,
yeah.
and then I was like, oh, there's this show. So I only recently found it. So yeah, nice show, and I'm a subscriber. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hey, guys, take the lead of Steve. Subscribe, go to iTunes, rate and review us. We could use the love. Steve, this was a blast. I had so much fun visiting with you. You are a joy, and I'm hoping we run into each other in a show. That would be a blast. So, any final words?
I'm very excited to run down and tell my girlfriend that Jesse Jackson said I was a joy, and leave it at that.
They're very nice. All right, listeners, go. Let's all be kind to each other. Let's be safe,
Mhm.
and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at SetListingBruce, and my personal Twitter is at JesseJacksonDFW. You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.